My name's Dave Coates. I'm a retired silvicultural researcher with the BC Forest Service. I worked with the Forest Service for about 30 years, undertaking research in the forests of northern British Columbia. Today we're standing in what's known as the interior cedar hemlock forests, which are transitional forests between our true coastal forest to the west of here and the more interior forests to the east. We're about 20 kilometers north of Hazelton, and Hazelton is where the Skeena and Bulkley rivers meet up. And we're in the unceded territory of the Gitxsan Nation. The particular forest we're looking at right here is an old growth stand. It's about 380 years old. It was established after a wildfire. And this is one of the stand types that are included in what's called the Date Creek Silvicultural Systems Project, which was started about 30 years ago. As everyone probably remembers, most people remember or are aware of, there were a lot of protests around logging in the 1980s. And the BC government at that time decided to set up a series of experiments in what was then 6 forest regions across the province to look at alternatives to clearcutting. And the Date Creek experiment was one of those. So here, we've put in an experiment with unlogged forest, 30% removal, 60% removal, and a clear cut. And this is, each unit is about 20 hectares in size, and it's been replicated 4 times. So there's a total of 16 treatment units, about 20 hectares in size, in this experiment. And what you're looking at here is the undisturbed old growth unit. There were extensive fires in this area in the mid-1800s, and so the experiment is also in stands that were about 140 years at the time the experiment was started, 160 years old now. The intent of this experiment was to look at how different levels of disturbance affect the growth of the forest and the various organisms that live in the forest. The 30% removal was a thinning of the forest. So what you're looking at here, we removed about 30% of the trees in that treatment unit, and they were just single trees or maybe a clump of 2 or 3 trees removed. And that was done uniformly throughout the forest. When you go to the 60% removal, we cut, say, 3 or 4 or 5 tree openings up to a ½ hectare size opening in the forest, and then in the matrix of trees between these, what we called gaps, we thinned it the same way that we harvested the 30% removal. And then we jumped to a clear cut as the other treatment unit, 100% removal. What we as a group of researchers working here have learned through the Date Creek experiment over a period of almost 30 years now, I think the big take-home message of what we learned is that this is feasible. We can do this. We don't have to clear cut. We can do partial cutting. We can meet all sorts of values. We can retain mature forest characteristics, and we can also regenerate new trees and have them growing in a healthy way. These forests are more diverse, they're more resilient, and they're less risk for management. There's a lot of research coming out now on trees and clear cuts, and with various problems with disease. Climate change is affecting them. They're a much greater risk than this sort of a management system that's just being a little easier on the land. There's been some 40-odd papers, scientific papers, peer-reviewed scientific papers, that have been published from this experiment. So we have a really good handle on how varying intensities of disturbance are affecting these forests. And we know that this works. You know, it works for multiple values. Timber, wildlife, various ecological processes that we're trying to maintain in the forest. It's very effective at maintaining these things. Now, why, One thing that I've wondered, and has perplexed me in my 30 years of being a forester, is how come I don't see more of this? Like, why aren't we doing more of this? And the only kind of conclusion I can come to is that forestry in BC, excuse me, comes from a really conservative culture. And they've gotten into this mindset that the only way we can harvest forests is to clear cut them, and that if we then plant trees and they survive really well for 5 to 10 years, we can consider ourselves good forest managers. And BC has gotten into this mindset that if we clear cut and we plant and the planted trees survive, we're good managers. And that's only scratching at the surface of the values we should be managing for. It's just this little tiny segment of what we should be looking at. Whereas here, we're looking at all sorts of things, all sorts of values, and figuring out ways to maintain it all, as well as do some logging. And I'm just hoping that people will come to see this, come to understand this, and that we'll do more of this, because this will save us. This will save us from all the problems we're in. Whereas continuing to clear cut, continuing to knock down the last remnants of old growth, it's not right. We've got to stop.